The sun was sinking low, bleeding its last fire across the desert sky. Dust hung in the air like an unsettled prayer, the kind whispered by those too tired to believe but too afraid to stop. The town square was alive with murmurs and boots scuffing earth, the smell of sweat and cheap whiskey clinging to the wind. And there she stood, Evelyn May Carter, barefoot, thin dress clinging to her frame, the hem caked in dirt. Her hair was tangled from days without care, but her eyes carried storms, green-gray, restless, fierce even as her chin trembled. Men had gathered as if for spectacle. A girl being sold was no new tale in a land where hunger bent spines and dried up mercy, yet it drew them like moths to flame. Some sneered, others pitted. A few looked away, ashamed to watch but too hollow to intervene. Her father, Samuel Carter, had the hand of a man beaten down by soil that no longer gave, and her mother Ruth kept her jaw set hard as flint, as if defiance could disguise despair. They had convinced themselves this was survival, that handing their daughter to another man was better than watching her starve under their roof. But survival comes in many shapes. Some tear flesh from the soul to buy another day. The man who placed coins in her father's palm was Silas Boone, an old drunk whose name was whispered with disgust. His shirt carried stains of whiskey, his beard was ragged and unwashed, and his eyes, the eyes of a man who had long since sold his own dignity to the bottle, rested heavy on her body. His grin was a ruin of yellowed teeth. "She'll do," he rasped, voice scratching like gravel. "Reckon she's young enough, T, last me through winter." A few laughed, bitter laughter of men too used to cruelty. Evelyn's cheeks burned red. She did not cry. She would not give them that. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes as he closed his hand over the coins. Her mother turned her face away, as though looking at her daughter one last time might break her resolve. Silas grabbed Evelyn's wrist. His hand was rough, too tight, reeking of whiskey and sweat. She flinched, tried to pull away, but his grip only tightened. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring as if it were already done. Another transaction in a land that turned people into property. That was when he stepped forward. Jonah Hale, a quiet cowboy, known most only by his silence. He stood near the edge of the square, leaning against a hitching post, hat brim low over a scarred cheek. His horse shifted beside him, sensing the tension. Jonah had been watching from the start, not with the eager curiosity of the others, but with the stillness of a man measuring something deep inside himself. His boots crunched against the dirt as he moved forward. The crowd stilled again, uncertain. Jonah was not the type to invite trouble, but neither was he the type to look away from it. "That's enough," he said, his voice low, gravelly, but steady. Silas looked up, smirking. "Ain't your business. Hale paid good coin for her, fair and square." Jonah's eyes flicked Evelyn. Her wrist still caught in that man's grip, her face pale but her jaw locked in quiet defiance. Something unspoken passed between them. Then he turned his gaze back to Silas. "Let her go." The drunk barked a laugh, loud and mean, glancing toward the crowd for support. "You gonna take her for yourself, Hale? Thought you liked your ranch empty. Ain't fit for raising nothing but ghosts." Jonah didn't answer with words. His hand drifted down, resting on the worn handle of his revolver. He didn't draw it, didn't need to. The gesture alone carried more weight than a shout. The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. Dust swirled around their boots, a tumbleweed rolling past like it too was holding its breath. Evelyn's heart thundered in her chest. She could feel Silas' grip tighten, the tremor in his arm betraying the sudden falter of his confidence. Jonah stood there, steady as stone, eyes fixed, a man whose stillness was more dangerous than another's rage. Finally, Silas cursed under his breath, shoving Evelyn forward so hard she stumbled. "Ain't worth the trouble," he spat, voice cracking with humiliation. "Keep her then, you sanctimonious bastard. She'll bleed you dry same as her parents." He turned, staggered off toward the saloon with mutters of revenge and whiskey promises. The crowd, disappointed there was no blood, dispersed in murmurs, their eyes casting sideways glances at Jonah, as if he'd broken some unspoken code. Evelyn stood frozen, her hands trembling, shame searing her skin like fire. She hated their stares, hated her parent averted faces. hated the way her life had been reduced to coins exchanged in the dust. Jonah reached a hand out to her, rough, callous, but steady. Not the hand of rescue, not the hand of man making a claim, but the hand of someone offering choice. For a long heartbeat she stared at it, unsure if she could trust anyone. But the weight of eyes pressing on her, the taste of dirt and shame, the memory of Silas' grip, it all drove her to move. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The contact startled her, not with fear, but with steadiness. His hand was warm, strong, yet gentle, as though he understood what it meant to hold without taking. Jonah tipped his hat to the crowd, then to her parents, who looked away in silence. Without a word, he led her through the square, boots steady, the whisper of their footsteps echoing in her ears. Behind them, whispers followed like shadows. But Evelyn May Carter, for the first time in her life, felt the air around her shift. It wasn't freedom yet, not safety, but it was a hand reaching out when all others had let go. And that, out here in the wild, where mercy was rare, was everything. Jonah's ranch rose out of land like a scar, weather-beaten boards, a leaning corral, a roof patched with more faith than lumber. The house was plain, its windows small, its porch crooked, but it stood steady against the sweep of prairie winds. Chickens pecked at the yard, and the smell of horse and dust carried from the barn. For Evelyn May Carter, who had never known more than her parents' weary shack in the judgment of the town, it felt both foreign and terrifying. This place was not polished, not grand, but it was solid, and solid was more than she had ever been given. Jonah said little as he showed her the rooms. A narrow bed, a kitchen with worn counters, shelves lined with jars of beans and flour, a hearth blackened with smoke. He did not tell her what to do, nor where she should fit. His silence pressed heavy at first, leaving her unsure whether she was guest, burden, or stray. The first days were clumsy. She spilled water from the pail, burned bread on the stove, pricked her fingers sewing. She cursed herself in whispers when alone, cheeks flushing with shame. But Jonah never raised his voice. He would show her once how to tie a knot in the fence wire, how to balance the skillet, so the cornbread browned even, and then he would step back, leaving her free to stumble or stand. It was in those quiet failures that Evelyn discovered something startling. No one struck her, no one sneered, no one told her she was useless. Her mistakes were simply hers, and her small triumphs, the first loaf that didn't burn, the first fence she strung tight, were hers too. The days stretched long, marked by chores and silence. Jonah worked the land with steady rhythm, his body lean and scarred by labor. Evelyn watched him from the porch sometimes, the way his shoulders bent as he drove posts, the way his hands coaxed stubborn boards into place. He never wasted movement, never showed haste. It was as if even the land itself would not dare rush him. And yet, for all his quiet, small gestures began to bloom between them. One evening, the wind shifted cold, sharp as needles. Evelyn shivered in her thin dress, curling under a blanket too small for the night's bite. At dawn, she woke to find another blanket folded neatly at her door, woolen warm, smelling faintly of hay and smoke. No note, no words, only thoughtfulness in its truest form. Another day, she found him mending a fence. His shirt was worn through at the elbow, fabric fraying into threads. She gathered her courage, took it while he worked, and stitched it by the fire with trembling fingers. When she set it back on his chair, he said nothing, but the next morning, she saw him wearing it, the patch strong, the seam neat. They shared suppers by the fire, the silence thick at first. She would glance up, find his eyes waiting, then drop hers again. But slowly, she dared to break that silence. A small comment about the weather, a joke about the stubborn chickens. His responses were sparse, but there was warmth in his voice when he chose to use it. Once, when she laughed, a soft, startled sound, he looked at her with something that almost resembled wonder, as though he had not heard laughter in years. When storms came, rattling the roof and splitting the sky with white veins of lightning, Evelyn trembled in her bed. Darkness pressed too heavy, bringing back memories of Silas' hand on her wrist, of her parents' cold eyes. But always, in those storms, a lantern appeared outside her door, lit and steady. Jonah never knocked, never lingered, just left the light. A silent promise. You are not alone in the dark. The whispers of town still followed them when they rode in for supplies. Bought girl, not proper. She'll ruin him. Evelyn felt their eyes hot on her back, slicing her pride to ribbons. She wanted to shrink, to hide, but Jonah's voice, quiet and sure, cut through her shame. "Let him talk," he said, adjusting the brim of his hat. "Wind don't change the mountain." She carried those words with her like a shield. In time, she began to see Jonah not as a quiet cowboy who had pulled her from shame, but as a man who lived each day with a dignity carved from silence. He bore his solitude like a scar, but beneath it was something she could feel, something steady, something gentle. One dusk, she watched him mend a fence post, the sky burning orange and purple behind him. His movements were slow, deliberate, each strike of the hammer measured, each breath even. She realized then that she was no longer waiting for the moment he would send her away. She was no longer living in fear of being cast off. Instead, she found herself wanting to stay. For the first time in her life, Evelyn May Carter was not someone's burden, nor someone's bargain. She was a woman learning the rhythm of her own hands, the strength of her own back, the worth of her own presence. And with every small gesture, blankets, stitches, lanterns in the storm, Jonah Hale was showing her something she had never known before. Not rescue, not charity, belonging. It was late summer when the past came riding back across the prairie. The day had begun like any other, Jonah mending harness leather by the barn, Evelyn kneeling in her small garden bed, hands sunk into the soil that fought her with every root and stone. The air was heavy, the kind of heat that made cicadas sing like rattles in the grass. Yet a chill prickled her skin before she even heard the hooves. 3 riders crested the rise. Dust cloaked them, but she knew the shape of the one in front. Silas Boone, his hat tilted back, face red with liquor, his grin as crooked as a broken fence post. At his side rode 2 men, rough, wide-shouldered, carrying the kind of look that meant trouble wasn't a stranger to them. Evelyn's blood turned cold. Jonah stepped forward, his hand brushing the revolver at his hip. Though he didn't draw, he simply stood, shoulders squared, the same way he had in the square weeks ago. "Well now," Silas slurred, reining in his horse with jerk. "Ain't this a pretty picture? Thought I'd come collect what's mine. Girl belongs to me. Hale, paid her parents fair and square." Evelyn rose from the dirt, heart hammering, soil clinging to her palms. The word stung, that reminder of coins and shame. But she no longer stood as she had that day in the square, small and trembling. She stood straighter now, her chin higher, though fear gnawed at her ribs. "She ain't yours," Jonah said, voice steady as stone. Silas spat in the dust. "Loss is different. This land's older than law," Jonah answered. The drunk's grin faltered, turning to a snarl. He swung off his horse, boots heavy, swaying but mean. His men followed, hands resting on their belts where knives and pistols hung. "You gonna shoot me, Hale?" Silas jeered. "In front of the lady? That how you win her? By flashing her iron?" Jonah didn't answer. His silence was louder than any boast. Then it began. Silas lunged, fists flying, rage and liquor lending him strength. Jonah met him with grit, their bodies crashing into the dirt. Blows landed, fists thudded, boots kicked. Dust rose in choking clouds. The other 2 circled, watching, half amused, half ready to jump in. Evelyn's breath came fast, hand shaking. She wanted to run, wanted to scream. But something inside her, something Jonah had been building in her, without words, refused to let her shrink back. She saw the rifle leaning against the porch, its barrel catching a lick of sunlight. Her feet moved before her thoughts could stop them. She seized the gun, the wood rough beneath her palms. She had never fired it, barely held it before, but she lifted it now, arms trembling, heart pounding. She stepped onto the porch, her voice rising sharp and clear. "Enough!" The men froze. Dust hung in the air, sunlight cutting through it like shards of glass. Evelyn's hands shook, but her eyes did not. She aimed the rifle square at Silas, though her body threatened to buckle under its weight. I'm not yours, she said, her voice steady despite the quiver in her arms. Not now. Not ever. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Silas staggered back, blood trickling from his lip, eyes narrowing. He sneered, but there was a flicker of something else. Fear, not of the rifle alone, but of the woman holding it. Jonah rose to his feet, chest heaving, dirt streaking his face. He said nothing, just stood behind her, silent as a mountain. Silas spat again, this time not in defiance but in defeat. Ain't worth it, he muttered, backing toward his horse. He cast one last bitter look at Evelyn, then at Jonah. She'll ruin you yet. His men shifted uncertain, then followed him. Hooves thundered away across the plain, carrying their shame with them. Silence fell. Only the cicadas sang. Evelyn lowered the rifle slowly, her arms aching, her breath ragged. Her knees threatened to give, but she forced herself to stand tall. Jonah stepped closer, not touching, not crowding. Simply there, a steady presence, waiting. She turned to him. His lip was split, his eyes swelling, blood streaking his cheek. For a moment she thought she might see disappointment in his gaze, or fear at the fierceness she'd shown. But there was none, only quiet respect and something softer beneath it. She set the rifle down, hands still trembling, and without a word she reached for a cloth, dipping it in water. Kneeling by his side, she pressed it to his wounds. He didn't flinch, only watched her with those steady eyes. Their silence was not empty now. It was full, brimming with something unspoken. Later, when the sun dipped and the prairie cooled, Evelyn walked to the little garden bed Jonah had built for her. She pressed seeds into the soil with careful fingers, covering them with earth. Her hands were still unsteady, but her heart was not. Jonah came to stand beside her, his shadow long in the fading light. Together they stood, watching the dark soil, waiting for life to rise from it. She knew the whispers in town would not stop. She knew the world would still try to name her as bought, as burdened, as less than worthy. But she also knew this. She was not the girl sold for coins anymore. She was a woman who had spoken, who had stood, who had chosen. And here, beside this quiet cowboy who had offered her dignity instead of chains, she had found something worth more than all the coins in the world. Belonging.